Okay, so welcome to this webinar. This is putting staff wellbeing first. I'm Katie Ruane, I'm from the Educational Psychology Service, and we've got Joanna Tilley on the chat today. Please use the chat to offer reflections, comments, and also ideas throughout this webinar. Because we really want to collate as many ideas as we can. This is just a starting point, and we want to use the knowledge and the experience and the skills that you have within your school in order to build even richer training and even richer self-reflection tool that I'll talk about later. So today we're focusing on one of the 5 key principles of recovery and reconnection identified in the Returning to Schools Graduated Response Guidance, and this is on the MED website. And today we're just focusing on putting emotional wellbeing first for school staff. The key aim of this webinar is to be thinking about how stress can have an impact on us, how we can cope in difficult times, and finally share research carried out in Nottinghamshire schools about what works in promoting staff wellbeing. And this isn't just about the current COVID context. This is for future. This is to ensure that we are always putting staff wellbeing at the forefront of of everything that we do within school contexts. Okay, so we'll start with a bit of an overview around stress. So there's different types of stress. There's positive stress, believe it or not, and this is where a deadline might lead to proactivity and super speed to finish a task. There's tolerable stress, so say that the deadline is 2 weeks away. It's not positive, but it's tolerable, and you still manage to do things. Then we have negative stress, and that's where demands outweigh the resources that we have, and we might have very little time to meet the deadlines, and things keep coming in all directions. So, for example, when the DfE published guidance at 10 p.m. on a Friday night, for example, or your child is ill, or your signal keeps disappearing, hopefully won't happen today. But for most teachers, for some teachers, this is a permanent state, or at least you fluctuate between the negative and the tolerable stress. And that's why we see a lot of people running on empty, and in a high number of exceptional teachers leaving the profession. And of course, this negative stress has an impact on many of our skills. It has an impact on our executive functioning skills, and these are things like memory, attention, impulse control, problem solving capabilities, and creativity. And the reason for this is that the amygdala in the brain, we go into fight, flight, or fight mode, and those modes, it impairs thinking because all we're thinking about is survival. That's what our body is responding to. And the long-term impact of that is sleep difficulties, having a lower immune system, a higher risk of mental health difficulties, and in different contexts, it can damage relationships. If you think if we're struggling with our impulse control, we're more likely to snap and to struggle to manage our emotions. And within the class, and do feel free to share ideas within the chat for this, but within the class, how do we think that has an impact? We have less empathy because you're in self-protection mode. We're hypervigilant and more prone to knee-jerk reactions, less flexibility, poor planning, memory issues, and that has an impact on curriculum delivery. And across the school, that might lead to more teacher absence, poorer learning, and behaviour outcomes for the children. It may present as people blaming each other, may create isolation, and in the worst case scenarios, it's a toxic environment, and that leads to toxic stress. So it's a bit of a cycle. So it can be helpful to consider this kind of state of high alert using something we call the window of tolerance. Okay, so everyone has a window of tolerance, and this is a phrase that's coined by Dan Siegel, a researcher and author in the area of brain-based parenting. He's done some fantastic books, so which I highly recommend as a professional, but also as a parent. And it's the idea that there's an optimal zone of arousal where we're able to manage and thrive in everyday life, and it's in this zone that we function at our best. But optimal functioning only happens, and think about this within the current context, when we feel connected and when we feel safe. And it's within this optimal level where we have the opportunities for positive experiences and relationships. So if we're not there, if we're not in that zone, we're less likely to have those positive experiences and maintain those relationships. And this is applicable not just for adults, but for children. So you think of the pupils and their window of tolerance at the moment. And sometimes it's helpful to ask yourself, what helps you stay in that optimal zone? And keep this in mind when I introduce this next slide. So in April and May, we asked you, what do you feel will be the hindering factors in managing your well-being once the schools fully reopen? And these were the 4 key discussion points that were brought up by staff members at the time. So practicalities of keeping people safe, pressures of learning gaps, managing parental concerns and anxieties, and managing pupil anxieties. And this is it's a stressful situation, and you're managing a school, an online school, and most schools are also managing being a community hub, as well as trying to meet the needs of parents, of pupils, of staff members, of your own family members. But beyond this, what actually explains the level of stress that you might be feeling? I won't comment on your own experiences because everyone will have their own personal experiences about this. But if you consider the following points in the COVID context, from psychology, we know that the following things create feelings of calm. So, number 1, when we know what is happening. Number 2, when we know how long it will last and if it will end. Number 3, when we have received clear and trusted information. Number 4, when there are no conflicting messages. Number 5, when we're able to think collectively about collective problems. And number 6, when we feel connected. So I'll let you have your own reflections around that, and whether or not you feel we've had the optimum ways of feeling calm in this context. So although we may have tried to feel connected by having a universal language of rainbows, and we're trying to think collectively as a school hub, for example, it's not surprising that actually the high level of stress that you may have felt or will still be feeling. And just to come back to the window of tolerance and to say that it's completely normal to have a smaller window during stressful times, and that given the number of working days, for example, that you have left to plan for September, amongst the conflicting messages that we're hearing in the media, your window of tolerance is smaller, and that's completely natural. And it might be worth kind of acknowledging that. So when worry becomes panic, how do we cope? What do we do? So the first thing to do is remember that anxiety is completely natural and normal response, and it's a coping mechanism in the face of real danger. So anxiety jumpstarts our fight, flight or freeze response so that we're more likely to survive. So it's meant to be there to save us, except there's kind of a glitch in the way that we respond, and anxiety can feel as though it's there even though there's no physical threat. So our brain doesn't know the difference between a real threat, so a bear coming towards us, or one that's in our mind, you know, in even in the safety of our homes when we're laying in bed at night. Our brain doesn't know the difference, which means it experiences all the same physiological responses, and our mind tries to solve a problem that it can't solve. And that's why we end up kind of chasing our tail with what if scenarios and thoughts running through our minds. So it's helpful to consider if there's a best time to make, if that's the best time to make a decision. And thinking back over the window of tolerance, are you functioning at your best? And when you have to make decisions, use the facts you have rather than the thoughts and the emotions that may build up in your mind. And challenge any kind of automatic reactions, any automatic thoughts. So cognitive behavioural therapy often focuses on identifying automatic thinking errors. And some of these, for example, are all or nothing thinking. So it's the idea that life is wonderful, it's amazing, or it's terrible. It's either black or it's white. There's nothing in between. Fortune telling, so the idea that we, based on little evidence, we say, well, I'm not going to get that job. So you think your thinking error is that you've got a crystal ball and you can tell the future. And also magnifying the negative, so imagining that the worst is going to happen based on very little evidence. And it's helpful sometimes to kind of question the evidence that you do have. And we all experience those thinking errors. It's acknowledging those, it's catching those, and trying to kind of reframe them and relook at your evidence. What's the data? Is that a perception or is that a fact? Another strategy is using up the energy when you're in an intense state. So when you think of that window of tolerance, and that if you're feeling really hyper vigilant, and I always think of meerkats in this instance, you know, the kind of when they're looking around, not really high alert. And there'll be children like this within your schools, within your classrooms, that are on high alerts. That, you know, they're the first to notice if there's a visitor in the classroom. They're the first to notice if something changes. And as adults, we're the same. That when we are in that tense state, when we are in that hypervigilant state, we have a high amount of energy, and coping strategy can be to try and release that energy. So we have what you call progressive muscle relaxation, and we often don't realise how tense our body is. So right now, are your shoulders relaxed right now, or are they close to your ears? How relaxed are they? And when you're trying to sleep at night, do you notice, is your jaw tight or is it relaxed? And if I could ask everyone now, it's a bit tricky with not being able to see anyone, but I'm going to put faith in the fact that you'll do this. If I could ask everyone to put your hands out and scrunch your hands up into a ball and hold this position. And how many of you are now holding their breath. And if you are, exhale. And that's just an exercise to demonstrate that our emotions affect our body, and our body is connected to our breath. And so exercise can help you release this tension, but of course you're least likely to do exercise at the time that you most need it, and that's the irony. Another helpful analogy is to remind yourself that emotions are temporary, and use the weather. I mean, particularly in the UK, it's a very good analogy. And so I'm going to read out a short section of it's called Sitting Still Like a Frog, which is based around mindfulness. And it's a book that's it's mindfulness exercises for children and their parents, but schools often find it really helpful. Okay, so sit down comfortably somewhere. Close or half close your eyes and take some time to determine how you're feeling right now. What is the weather like inside you? Do you feel relaxed and sunny inside, or does it feel rainy or overcast? Is there a storm raging perhaps? What do you notice? Without really thinking about it too much, summon the weather report that best describes your feeling at the moment. Once you know how you're doing right now, just let it be, just as it is. There's no need to feel or do anything differently. You cannot change the weather outside either, can you? Stay close to this feeling for a while. Direct your friendly and curious attention to the clouds, the clear sky, or the storm that is brewing. This is how it is right now. Like the weather, you simply cannot change your mood. Later today, the weather will be completely different again. But right now, this is how things are. And that is absolutely fine. Moods change, they blow over. There is no need to take any action. What a relief. So I hope that's a helpful analogy that you can use with children, staff, parents, or family members, or yourself, to think of emotions like the weather. And finally, consider if the worries that you're holding actually belong to someone else. So if you look at this and acknowledge that there'll be some things that are out of your control, and there is an art of kind of letting things go that we cannot control, and focus on the things that we can do to help. And these can be phone calls, any kind of action that leads to social connection, supporting others, and just by prompting action, you move out of that state of stress and go back to that window of tolerance again. And just by doing something, it creates movement, and you're doing things for yourself and for others. And what this does is that it leaves you feeling more powerful rather than powerless. Whereas if you're constantly worrying about the things that you can't control, you'll feel powerless, and then that will have an impact on your emotions. So try and focus on the things that you can control. Encourage yourself to do something, and then you'll feel more powerful, and that will have an impact on your emotions. Has anyone got any reflections on anything that I've talked about so far? Anything that particularly resonates, or that they have any questions about?
Katie, I think a few people were saying how helpful those 6 points were that you made about the things that we know from psychology we need to feel in control and to feel comfortable. And we're saying that those will be helpful things to share with staff, you know, to help people understand perhaps why we are all feeling more stressed at the moment.
Oh, okay. What I could do is that I'll put that as a slide, and then when we put the slides on MEd, then those 6 things will be there for you to refer to.
Yeah,
That'd be helpful.
I put some of them in the chat, but then I don't think all 6 are there, so maybe that would be a good idea to have another slide just with those things listed.
Brilliant. Anything else, Joanna?
No, just there's been a bit of chat about different resources and where to find them. People have been sharing some thoughts on that, which is really helpful actually, because some people are obviously familiar with some of these things, so able to tell other people where they can find them. So,
fantastic. Thank you for engaging with the chat.
Yeah.
Otherwise it feels like I'm talking at a screen, which is very tricky. Okay, so we'll move on to the kind of part B of this presentation, of this webinar. So bearing all those things in mind, thinking about your own well-being and how stress can have an impact on you as an individual, but also for your school and your school staff and your family. Keep those things in mind. Some of you might be aware, although I wouldn't judge you if you didn't, given the amount of guidance that you've had to read recently, but some of you might be aware that the DfE have announced on the 7th of June that a voluntary wellbeing charter for school staff will be published later this year, with a greater focus on staff wellbeing. And we hope this is good news. They say that it will integrate wellbeing into its school workload policy test and embed staff wellbeing into any relevant training, standards and guidance which it has responsibility for. And they also talk about tackling stigma and recruitment and retention issues. And one of the people on they've got a representative from the chair of Mind on that working group, along with quite a few people. So hopefully that will be a good move forward. Sorry, could I just ask people to turn off their microphones, please? Bear with me a minute while I'm just going to mute everyone. Okay, brilliant. Okay, Nottinghamshire already recognise that many schools are already putting staff wellbeing first. And our adult resilience group carried out research across Nottinghamshire schools and have created a staff wellbeing reflection tool. And within this reflection tool, we've identified 7 key themes that we really wanted to share with you. So this reflection tool will be uploaded onto the MEd website this term, and it includes good practice pointers, practical ideas and questions to get staff members thinking about how to promote staff wellbeing in your school. And remember that these ideas came straight from Nottinghamshire schools, with some psychology I've just put in italics, but most of them are direct from schools. So, and if there's any more ideas in each of these themes, then please do add them to the chat and we can add them into the self-reflection tool. We want this to be a bottom-up approach, and it's amazing to hear what schools are already doing in putting staff wellbeing first. So theme one is around wellbeing awareness. So we found that in schools that have promoted staff wellbeing, they supported staff members' understanding of emotional health and wellbeing. So they knew about the campaign around Teach You 5 a Day. They had access resources and training from Mind or the Brilliant Schools website, for example. and they delivered or at least brought people in to enhance staff members' understanding around what is emotional health and well-being. They had check-in opportunities and staff access support around their emotional health and well-being. So internally, they had check-ins where staff members could go talk to different members of staff. They had buddy systems in place. And externally, some schools had supervision or coaching from external agencies. But beyond that, staff knew where to go for this support and felt comfortable in accessing that support. Schools also spoke of having a policy specifically around supporting staff well-being. And this was accessible, it was clear, and it was also, they spoke of this policy being alive as opposed to a policy that's written and not necessarily accessed or looked at. It was alive within their school. There was a working group or a designated person that focused on staff well-being, and that's how important it was for those schools, that they had dedicated time within a group or sometimes an individual that focused upon solely developing staff, promoting staff well-being. Emotional health and well-being was on their meeting agenda as a standing item, and that was both at SLT meetings and also staff meetings. It wasn't skipped, it was talked about, again, demonstrating that it's alive, it's and active, and that it can people keep coming back to it. There are systems in place to gather staff members' views. So things like a suggestion box that was anonymous, an app. So some schools had funded an app. Some schools had talked about ideas with their Link EP and used the staff wellbeing audit to gather views. And also there were clear pathways for staff to access internal or external support around their emotional health and well-being. And all of these kind of little elements were actually huge in promoting staff well-being. So theme 2, and most of you won't be surprised at this, the theme 2 was about relationships. So the school actively promoted positive relationships between the staff and the pupils, and this was things like having trained ELSAs, so emotional literacy support assistants. They had training in pupil coaching. They'd had training around attachment aware schools and in how to build positive relationships with their pupils. They had good positive relationships between staff and parents, and the discussions that came out are around how do you manage communications with parents and the expectations of staff members that parents may hold. There was one school in the south that had a contract of communication that all parents had to adhere to, and then the staff equally had to adhere to. So staff and staff, so it was that staff had time beyond that of work, informal times to get together. Pupil and pupil relationships, parent and pupil. So this was they talked about parents in schools in the mornings to do reading, celebration assemblies, etc. And then parent to parent, so some schools offered coffee mornings, parent groups with a focus on well-being, and also community events. And relationships is one of the key one of the 5 key principles that I talked about at the beginning that's on our graduated response document. Relationships is everything, and so it's no surprise that it came up. And what does this create when we have these positive relationships? It's that sense of belonging, and unfortunately, the idea of social distancing isn't the ideal one, because actually we're not socially distancing, we're physically distancing, and how important it is to have that connection. So, for example, those of you that have seen the film Castaway with Tom Hanks, sorry to you that haven't seen it, it's a bit of a spoiler alert, but what does Tom Hanks search for after sorting out his food, his shelter? He sorts out connection. And for those of you that have seen it, I'll just say one word, and I did shed a tear when he drifted away in the ocean, but Wilson. And it just demonstrates that us as human beings, we need connection. We need quality conversations. So when we have that fear about, well, how can we be in schools and not offer, physical affection, comfort to children? It's around quality conversations and healthy relationships, and being aware as adults that healthy relationships in our lives, they regulate us, and unhealthy ones dysregulate us, and acknowledging who you can get energy from, as opposed to people that may drain your energy. Okay, so theme 3, environment. So staff had space or spaces that were protected. So they were private and they weren't being moved out for clubs. And these spaces were appealing and comfortable. I feel a bit on edge after the announcement yesterday around buildings, but we'll put that to one side for now. And this was the interesting one. So there were basic toiletries in the toilet, including inspirational quotes. So remember, these are examples from Nottinghamshire schools. So these are small actions that staff reflected that it helped them promote their well-being. And finally, a tangible thing that can promote staff well-being, the washing up was carried out, and the dishwasher was regularly loaded and unloaded, which I think is probably indicative not just of school context, but also home. But I thought it was interesting that one came up. I can imagine that the washing up and the dishwasher is probably a regular staff room angst. Theme 4, and this comes back to staff members being humans first and then school staff second. The presence of food in the staff room, biscuits, cakes, free tea, coffee, milk, fruit or toast for staff. And this act of kindness promotes well-being. A weekly hot lunch was provided by school. Food is provided by school when school commitments lead to missing meal times. And break times are break times where no work is completed. And schools that did put the well-being of their staff first had time for self-reflection, because we're usually on a treadmill. We're moving from one task to the next. And do we really ever have that reflection time that we need to protect our well-being? And on that note, I'd like you to consider, are you more like Sally here, wondering about when she's going to get her MOT done, what's in the fridge for dinner, what she's going to have time, when she's going to have time to plan for next week, if she's going to sleep better tonight? Or are you more like Bob the dog, enjoying being in the moment, the feel of the leaves and the sounds passing him by? Do we give ourselves that time that we need? Do schools give the staff members time that we need? So theme 5, work-life balance. So schools who looked after their staff wellbeing had email curfews. They had social gatherings, flexible working arrangements, and out of office also replies. And the important point here was that some schools had them, but there was still a judgment about using them. Whereas in the schools that protected the staff wellbeing, there was an acceptance that it was okay to have auto replies, because you shouldn't be working if you're not contracted to work those days. Then therefore you will reply when you are within your working days. There was opportunities for toil, exercising at lunch times, and wellbeing days at school. And just a bit around the psychology of this. So schools talked about negotiated workload. And when we're able to negotiate our workload, we have that sense of autonomy and a sense of control. And if we have that sense of control, it actually increases our motivation and the pace at which we work. And another thinking error is that idea that we should be doing something. So try and limit the word should. Why? Because I should be doing X then leads to feelings of guilt, and instead you should be giving yourself permission to take the time that you need, rather than doing nothing and then feeling guilty about it. And also consider what uplifts your mood. So music is huge in impacting mood. When we have a task that we can finish, that makes us feel like we've achieved something, and it provides that sense of achievement that we need to enhance our well-being. Theme 6, and the hardest one to pinpoint into something tangible. In the schools that promoted well-being, there were signs that the school was a caring and trusting environment, and that was in how the school was described in discussions and from first impressions of its atmosphere. And the language being heard and reflected the ethos of the school, and there was permission for humour and fun. There was respect amongst all relationships, and all employees were valued and invested in. And finally, theme 7, and I think this is the most underrated behaviour that's needed for us to work at our best. Simply put, if we feel valued, we experience positive feelings, our well-being is enhanced, and we work hard. If we're not valued, we disengage. So the examples within Nottinghamshire schools included things like staff members of the week, and they called it silent stars, sporadic thank you cards between staff members, and psychology has showed us that genuine praise, that sporadic, is more effective than any other kind of praise that's more regimented and systematic. An appreciation tree which staff could add to, and genuine praise and recognition from SLT through discussions and an email. Okay, any reflections on those 7 themes? Anything that was shared in the chat, Joanna, that you would like to highlight?
Somebody's just saying that they're good ideas. They're all good ideas, but it is going to be dependent on different schools' circumstances as to what's possible. So I'm just saying that I think we collated these from a range of different schools, and obviously different schools do have different circumstances, and not everything's going to be possible in every school. Yeah, somebody else is just saying it's small step. You've got to start with the small steps, and every little thing, I think, is what we said at the beginning. Every intervention, every action or any interaction is an intervention in itself, isn't it? Yeah. And will be making a positive difference, however small.
Thank you, Joanna. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you for your feedback in the chat. That's really valued. Yes, so to kind of reiterate that, we might not be able to do every single thing on that list, but these are examples of what has worked in some Nottinghamshire schools, and it's important not to forget the meaning of your work, because when you think what's it all for, these small actions within your school community can promote staff well-being, and this then leads to a happier school, less negative stress, and then greater gains for your pupils emotionally and academically. So it's kind of an investment, really. School staff, there's a hope, I guess, that school staff could use this as an opportunity to put staff's emotional health and well-being at the forefront of everything that you do. So the self-reflection tool will be on the MED website as soon as it's ready this term. And just to say that particularly within this context, it's important that we put well-being first. Okay. And this slide is just, I thought it was really valuable, but it's to emphasize that everyone will need different things at different times to support their emotional health and well-being. And if you would like to have a think about, what do you need at the moment? So looking at these tokens, if you could take something, what would you take? And whatever you want to take, consider if you want to share this with a colleague in your school or with a family member to let them know what you feel you need at the moment. Okay, I've got a bit of signposting now. So most of you will be aware, but just in case you didn't, that the Psychology Service are collating resources and guidance on our website. So this is the website that I keep alluding to. So it's the MED support, and the PowerPoint slides and the video from today will be uploaded onto that website, as well as the staff wellbeing reflection tool. And also on that website, there's the graduated response document that I spoke about earlier with those 5 key principles. There's also a document around returning to schools, around the psychology of staff wellbeing, and also a document around supporting staff to support parents on the return to schools. There's lots of resources on there. I'm sure, I know that a lot of schools have accessed these already, but just to signpost them once again. Okay. And then these will be made, these will be on the MED website, but there's a few slides here that if you need any support, this can be a really emotive topic because everyone's in different places at different points. So please do seek out support from colleagues, from staff members, or for any of these organisations. Okay. And then just to finish up on, really, we've got a final few strategies from positive psychology which are shown to enhance our well-being. And the first one is to write down 3 things that you're particularly grateful for today. And it'd be great if you want to share these in the chat. I'll just tell you a bit about why this works. Gratitude. Our nervous system is biased towards focusing upon threats in our environment so that we can survive. And so it's on kind of a higher alert for negative emotions. So we're always biased to look for those. So in this context in particular, we need to counterbalance that by noticing the positives, the glimmers, and the positive moments. And when we do that, it can often give us grounding and a sense of kind of security. So if anyone wants to share those, that would be fantastic. I also have a mission for you to carry out a random act of kindness over the next 2 days. And again, I'll just explain why this tends to work. So a random act of kindness, it's an action, it's a movement, it's doing something. And when we go back to that window of tolerance, it moves us out of that stress state. And it also gives hope to others. And hope isn't a quality, it's created by the actions that people take. So that's what a random act of kindness can do. I won't be checking up on all 80 odd of you, but if you could carry out a random act of kindness over the next 2 days and acknowledge how that might make you feel and make the other person feel as well. Okay, and the final one is when this is all over, I will. And if you want to just share it in the chat, that would be fantastic. I think I would probably train, when this is all over, I'll probably want to train as a hairdresser just in case it happens again and need to cut my own hair and other people's. Okay. Joanna, is there anything you wanted to share? Has anyone? Commented within the chat? A lot of people have said, I said hugs. Yeah, swimming. Oh, I can relate to that. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, and then the final slide is to say thank you. Thank you so much for coming today. I do appreciate you're very busy, and please do feedback. What is it that you'll take away from today, and what did you appreciate the most from this webinar? And that will help us build upon any further training, but also what people found really interesting. But thank you so much. Please do take care of yourself, and if you do need any support, please do seek out that support from your family and friends and colleagues within the school. If you've got any questions, then you could add those in the chat too. But thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording now.